Never forget that in the media world, framing is everything. They can tell you something really, really good in a bad way to make it seem like it's bad when it's actually really good. Case in point, black support for Donald Trump. This NBC News story, it's a poll actually, talks about the great gains Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden have made with black voters nationally, saying Sanders gains ground on Biden with black voters nationally. Trump's approval rating with black voters stands at just 14%. Just 14%. It's the word just I find interesting. You know why? Do you know how many, what percent of the black vote Donald Trump received in 2016? 8%. He has nearly doubled his support in the black community. And not only that, the story shows that he basically doubled his support among black men, standing at around 24%. That's huge. That's absolutely huge. Look, man, Trump's not perfect, but what always drives me, one of the biggest motivations I have for, political commentary is how the media lies about what's going on. And they do it in sneaky ways. They take data that's really, really good for the Trump campaign and they make it sound bad. Let's read the story. And I've got some other tweets I'll show you. Actually, yeah. Okay. Anyway, they say as the Democratic primary battle turns to states with more racial diversity than the first two nominating contests in Iowa and New Hampshire, newly released data from NBC News Wall Street Journal poll finds that Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders now enjoys similar levels of support among black Democratic primary voters as former Vice President Joe Biden does, while all of their other rivals, with the exception of former New York City Mayor Mike Bloomberg, have failed to gain any meaningful traction with the crucial voting bloc. Absolutely important to point out as well, it's very, very good news for Bernie Sanders, who struggled to gain support among the black community. So as we can see, that is good news, but they're not framing it as bad news. I mean, maybe later in the story, they'll be more fair to Trump. But of course, framing is the name of the game. Let's read more. But the same poll also shows that all black registered voters give President Donald Trump an approval rating of just 14%. And they would overwhelmingly they would have overwhelmingly chose any of the Democratic candidates over him in a general election. Now, there is not a direct correlation between approval rating and Donald Trump. What does that mean? They give him an approval rating of 14%. Does that mean that someone is asked on a scale of 1 to 100 how much they oppose the president or disapprove and they said 14? Or is it that when they ask 100 people, 14% said they support Donald Trump? I'm pretty sure approval rating is calculated by asking people if they generally approve. So they do something where they'll say like somewhat approve, slightly approve, disapprove, but you know how those things work. If 14% say they approve of Donald Trump, but last time only 8% voted, it's good news. They should be writing like, interestingly, Donald Trump's support has increased since the 2016 election, now sitting around 14%. And while low, it does show that Donald Trump's efforts to gain ground among the black community is paying off at least somewhat. Maybe not as much as he actually wants, but he's tried very, very hard to gain ground in this manner. Now, when you look at the actual data, apparently it's 24% men, which shows probably Kanye West's impact. And I really mean it. I'm not trying to downplay anything here. Kanye West is extremely influential and popular among a lot of people. Outside of the black community, Kanye West probably had a massive impact on Donald Trump's approval rating, whether anyone wants to admit it or not. Dude's famous, especially among evangelicals and the evangelical black community. There was a really, really awesome video I saw where Kanye brought in Sia, and she sang a gospel version of, I think, what I can't remember what song it was, but it was really, really cool. That's influence. That's going to work. That's going to help Trump. Let's read more. They say, according to the newly released data, Biden has the support of 31% of black Democratic primary voters, while Sanders captures the backing of 29%. The NBC News Wall Street Journal poll used an oversample of black voters to gain greater insight into their views of the 2020 field. Because the margin of error for black Democratic primary voters alone, a sample size of 139 respondents, stands at a high 8.31%, it is difficult to differentiate the true levels of support for each of the candidates. So theoretically, Trump could have no support or massive support. Sure, we'll see. We'll see how things turn out. Still, the close margin shows that Sanders has made inroads in a community previously dominated by Biden. Aggregated data from 2019 shows that Biden led Sanders among these voters by as much as 30 percentage points in NBC News, Wall Street Journal, and national polls last year. Bloomberg, who has saturated the TV and radio airwaves with more than $300 million in personal spending over the last 10 weeks, received about half as much support with black primary voters as either Biden or Sanders, while all other Democratic candidates were mired in single digits. So I'm not super interested in where we're at with Klobuchar or Buttigieg. I really want to get down to the Donald Trump numbers. They say this: while the poll may show muted enthusiasm for much of the Democratic field among black voters, one candidate elicits particularly strong disapproval: President Donald Trump. Trump's approval rating among all black voters stands at just 14%, with 84% disapproving, including 69% who say they disapprove of him strongly. The president fares slightly better in their ratings of his economic performance, with 23% approving and 62% disapproving of how he handles the economy. Which brings me to the big question when it comes to elections. If you hate somebody, will you vote for the economy? You might disapprove of Donald Trump, but if 23% approve of the economy, and that's what they're really after, I think they'll still pull the lever for Donald Trump. Among all black voters, nearly 8 in 10 say they are very uncomfortable with his candidacy for president in 2020. There is a significant gender gap in views of the president among black men. 24% approve, 72% disapprove, while among black women, just 6% approve and 93% disapprove. You know, a hard truth for a lot of people on the right is that women don't like Trump. I think Ben Shapiro said something about it. People on the right got mad. It's true. Nearly 70% of millennial women are Democrats because they do not like Donald Trump. They think he's gross. They think he's a bigot. I just did a sit down with YouTuber Ariel Scarcella, who announced she was leaving the left, and she said Trump is bad on women. I think that's one of Trump's weaknesses, and I don't know how he improves that because it's Trump, but I think you can see it in the data. Now, look, this information is still really good news for Trump because previous data suggested that Trump had 4% approval among black women. So even that is up about 50%. But the 24% approval for Donald Trump among black men, that's pretty incredible. I'm going to show you some tweets here. Abby D. Phillip, she is a CNN political correspondent, tweeted, looking closely at this NBC Wall Street Journal poll of black voters, the gap between black men and black women in their approval of Trump is very notable. Different measurement, but it is a much larger gap that existed in 2016 exit poll. 24% of black men approve of Trump versus 6% of black women. So they highlight that section I just showed. But take a look at this graph. Race and gender exit poll. We can see that black men for Trump, 13%, and black women, 4%. I know they're not the same numbers. It's very, very important to point out. These are people who actually voted. Approval doesn't necessarily mean they're going to vote or not vote. But I think it's fair to say if people are more likely to approve of Trump on economics, I think economics is going to be that driving factor for people when they pull that lever because money talks and BS walks. So she links to the poll, but we then have this tweet from Michael McAdams, who is a national press secretary for the NRCC, saying the takeaway is real Donald Trump has nearly doubled his approval among black men. If this holds, he's nearly guaranteed re-election. This is fascinating. The saying goes that if a Republican can get 20% support among the black community, a Democrat will never win again. I know they say the again. I think it just basically means if Trump can get around 20%, he won. Here's the thing. He's at 14%. So the guarantee, okay, he's 6 points off his guaranteed re-election. But you combine the economy, moderates swinging for Trump, pushing away from the left, with 14% approval among the black community, and I think it stands to reason Trump's guarantee is there. So I'll say it one more time. He's not at 20%, but 14 is still really, really close with a long way to go until the November election. And if the Democrats keep playing silly games, and if Trump keeps pushing on his campaign to speak with black voters, I think he's going to be successful in cracking that 20% number. Keeping in mind, 3 other polls have Trump at 36%. This is the outlier. Well, actually, the 3 may be outliers. I'm not sure. It's hard to know because there's a lot of polls. But when you have 3 different polls showing around 30% support, you can't discount them as just static, right? Every so often in all of aggregate polling, you'll find one spikes or dips really hard in a certain direction. And you got to be careful. That's why aggregates are important. But this is now another poll. It's not nearly the same. They're saying he has half as much support as, say, Emerson did. But it is showing that Trump, I think if we were going to calculate a margin of error, with 3 polls saying he's above 20%, one saying he's slightly below, I think it's fair to say he's probably at that number. Democrats will never win if they lose a tiny fraction of the black community. They say in hypothetical head-to-head matchups, overwhelming majorities of these voters also say they would choose the Democratic candidate. Joe Biden leads with them over Trump, 89% to 8%. Sanders leads him 87 to 7, and Bloomberg leads him 84 to 11. Klobuchar and Buttigieg fare slightly worse, but would still enjoy about 3/4 of black support in these matchups. Buttigieg leads over Trump 75% to 16. Klobuchar leads 77 to 15. I guess we can only wait because we're still just about 8.5, 9 months away from truly figuring out what happens. And I'm just going to tell all y'all right now, time flies. Time absolutely flies. Feels like just yesterday the guy got elected. Actually, I don't know. It's kind of crazy. We're getting really, really close to see the actual, I guess, decision of the American people. The media can tell us everything in the world, but November will be the true deciding factor. Are the American people happy with Donald Trump, or are they upset with him? The vote will speak. The vote will tell us. It's just that. The media can say whatever they want. None of it means anything. Everything I say, meaningless. We're going to see truly how people feel come re-election time. Stick around. Next segment's coming up in a few minutes, and I will see you all shortly.